what really impacted me in this whole journey was that China has stolen a march on Uncle Sam. It has outflanked America by putting huge amounts of money into infrastructure across the whole nation. And the reason why it's been able to do this is because it's got no wars going. America has got itself totally entangled in the octopus that it is in wars everywhere, particularly in the Mediterranean and the Arab Islamic world. So what America has done is it has squandered all its resources and put it into war, into the military-industrial complex, and America has lost its opportunity to be a leader.
Hi, this is Bruce Lipton, and you're listening to Green Planet FM.
Kia ora, greetings, and welcome to Green Planet FM 104.6. I'm Tim Lynch, and I trust that you are doing well. I invite you to stay with me over the next hour as we discuss and find ways to take care of our unique and magnificent green planet Earth. We need to be reminded that every day there is some event happening in our world that is actually very heartwarming. Like the myriad numbers of people globally engaged in random acts of kindness, where they do wonderful deeds to help someone out, and in the process receive delightful smiles back, resulting in a win-win situation that brings a little more light to our day. Or paying it forward, where someone may offer to do you a favour of gifting you either time or money, and you graciously decline, but happily say, please, it's okay, just pay it forward. And do a favour to some person whom you wish to make happy. These unheralded happenings are in many ways like the glue that keeps our society intact and coherent. For like generous acts of goodwill and even volunteerism, where we find ourselves in a peaceful disposition to feel that we can gift the community and world, it makes a heartfelt impact, as this feeling of connectivity and connection radiates out into the community and the world at large. So we need to remember this ability to bring a little more levity and warmth to our daily life, as it definitely feeds the soul, and on more subtler levels, we never know who our kind actions may touch.
Kia ora and welcome. Today I have in the studio Tim Lynch, who is normally sitting where I'm sitting, but I'm going to interview him today on his recent visit to China. So welcome, Tim, and it's lovely to be interviewing you.
Oh, ni hao. Hello, and kia ora.
Well, Tim, last September you took off for about 12 days to China, a flying visit. But then, having been Air New Zealand crew in the past, I guess you're used to flying visits.
Very true.
But Tim, tell me, where did you go first?
Well, I went from Auckland to Hong Kong, and then from Hong Kong I took a quick flight up to Shanghai, and I was in Shanghai, then to Xi'an, the ancient capital, up in the Shaanxi province, and then Suzhou, which is a smaller city just west of Shanghai, and then back to Shanghai, Hong Kong, to Aotearoa.
Okay, so that sounds really quite interesting and a lot of places to visit. Why did you go?
Well, there were a number of reasons. So I used to fly as crew for Air New Zealand, and I came across Bruce Cathy, who was a 737 cap, and he has a long history of checking out unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, and he was really right out there in the early stages of the late 60s, 70s and the 80s, 90s, where he worked out that there was a planetary grid, and he found out that a lot of UFO sightings were on this particular mathematical or geometric grid that embraced our whole planet. that the Russians also seem to have an understanding of. And he had looked at how the pyramids of Cheops was placed in Egypt, as well as the pyramids in Mexico, Teotihuacan, and he found a US Air Force photograph or map of one sitting in the Shaanxi province up in China. And I wanted to know more about it. And way back in 1986, I'd gone up into China looking for it. I found a number of pyramids that were actually tombs very close to Xi'an, the ancient capital, and I photographed them and climbed them, but they were extremely small. But I didn't find this one that I really wanted. So I went back in 1990, about 6 weeks after Tiananmen Square, and had another look. Now, it's really interesting because it was very, very peaceful. When I was in China both those times, I hardly saw a policeman. I didn't see any army or guns or anything like that. The country seems to run really quite harmonious to the average eye looking. Anyway, so this time when I went back in 1990, I hired a bike and I used Bruce Cathy's Air Force map, or photocopy of an Air Force map, and tracked rivers and railway lines. And after bicycling for about 35 k's, I found this pyramid and I climbed it and realised it was nowhere near the gigantic size that it was supposed to be. It was only around about 36 metres high, and it had a base around about, around about 200 metres long. And I thought to myself, well, this is definitely it, but it's not the one that we thought was going to be the big eye-opener for the human race. And this pyramid, it's called the Maoling Mausoleum, and one of the Han Dynasty emperors has been buried underneath there. Now, it's very interesting because there's supposed to be a lot of mercury being put into that pyramid as well, because that Han leader wanted longevity. He wanted to build up his life. And so he was actually given mercury, thinking that mercury was going to be the answer to his life, which cut it short instead.
Oh, dear.
This is some of the craziness there. But anyway, I came back to New Zealand and I told Bruce Cathy, I said, look, Bruce, I'm sorry, the great myth is busted, doesn't exist. And so I left it at that, and I had photos, but it was only a year ago that I decided to develop these photos. I had just put them in storage. And so I've got these pictures, and anyway, this is one of the reasons I thought I was going to go back up again and have another look at it, and I was going to do a Facebook video and say, well, here I am. We can be rest assured that, regrettably, this gigantic pyramid that's supposed to be in China does not actually exist. So that was one of the drivers of me going to China. The other one was, back in 2003, I was a teacher, a language teacher, and one of my best students, or my best student, happened to be living up just out of Shanghai in Zhuzhou, and she invited me up and said, well, look, if you're going to come up to China, I can be your translator. So that's how I ended up being in China, because I knew that with a translator, they'd be able to help me at another deeper level of finding out about the psyche of China.
Wonderful. So a sort of 2 different reasons for going, and 12 days to do it all in.
That's right. Well, I'd previously been to Hong Kong about, 15 to 20 times, and then in early 76, I'd gone over into Shenzhen, which was the new Chinese development area. It was an industrial zone. They were starting to realise that there's a whole lot of potential in that whole country. And then I'd gone over to Canton in about 1980, and I'd had numerous trips up into China. But in 2003, I was teaching up there for a number of months, and I realised that what China was doing is that it was renewing or modernising all the cities across China. And so the authorities, what they are doing is that they'd go into a city and they'd say, where are sacred temples, the sacred well, the sacred hill, the lake, anything of cultural significance. They'd put a ring fence around them and then basically level all the shanty buildings and start again. And that's what they have done. And when I went up there last year, it just blew me away of what I would say the physical process of modernisation was profound, and I can go into that in a moment.
Well, they've kind of learnt from the West's mistake, because in the West we've done things more gradually and over much more time, and done a lot of things incorrectly and destroyed things of cultural value. They've been able to look at that and see what we didn't get right and then improve on that. So that's why you'd have modern cities with beautiful ancient temples and things, I would imagine.
Yes, well, I used Singapore in many cases as the template, because Singapore was pretty much a shanty town, and first time when I went there was in 1972, and it was a pretty rough area, and Lee Kuan Yew had just come into power, and he was starting to get some traction in making that city a modern city. So Singapore started off with a whole lot of buildings and some very strong central planning, and it has become a very successful city, architectural-wise, etc. Now for China, mainland China, they followed that particular template, and Shanghai and all the major cities are now very, very modern. What I noticed was that there were, I don't know where to start, but what I can say, I'll start underneath. When I went to Shanghai, I noticed that they'd copied Singapore's subways, and all the subways were clean and tidy and efficient. And when I went upstairs at ground level, there they had all these buses, clean, new buses, and they were all tied in electronically at all the different bus stops. There was information as to where the buses were. But the Chinese people, using the ubiquitous mobile phone, could track everything across the whole city. And so they knew when to go and pick up a bus just by quickly looking at their telephone. And then further out, on the outskirts of town, this is what really blew me away, they had brand new airport-like bullet train stations, and from there the bullet trains fanned out across the country, and I realised just how much they had worked it all out. There was a lot of brain power brought in to make this country a 21st century country, and this is what the Chinese are on to.
Well, I suppose it's possible to do that if you have a dictatorship. Authoritarian country, because you don't have to go through all the regulations and red tape that we'd have to do here to be able to do that. And also, I guess, everything isn't privatised.
There's all these considerations. I was amazed as the bullet train that I was on, I'd look out at the countryside, and a lot of it very green, and a lot of gardens everywhere, producing food for the cities. And I would see motorways that had been punched through into the countryside, 3 lanes on one side, 3 lanes on the other. And I realised that the authorities would have been able to get these put in place very quickly because it would be all strategic. Strategic for industry and strategic also in the case of the military. And so, yes, there's all those sorts of things. And on the other side of the coin too, in all the cities, they had electric motor scooters. Everywhere they had these quiet little machines. And they'd worked out the cities that in the main thoroughfare, cars and buses would go down, and then there would be a little separation from those, and you'd have little lanes alongside where cars and trucks could bring in food and produce and merchandise, etc. And then next you'd have the footpaths, and where people could walk, and each one would be sort of divided by a little fence. And a lot of trees in the city, because they know they need trees. And this is going to be a big story for them in the future of getting trees to clean up the pollution, and by having electric motorcycles, because there's mega millions of them, motor scooters, shall I say, that the air is a very important issue for the Chinese at the moment.
Well, I mean, Beijing's one of the most polluted cities in the world, isn't it? And that's why even here you see a lot of Chinese with masks over their faces when they're in the city, because they don't want to breathe in all the carbon monoxide or whatever it is.
Particulates, all the different type of particulates at a micro level, yes. It's a huge problem. And then after the air challenge, they have also got to deal with water. Water is another one. And it was really interesting because I know when I was up in 2003, I went round looking at the water, and I'd buy water in shops. And believe it or not, the best tasting water that I drank was from Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, knowing in the future that people are going to get wise to the junk drink that they put out, have strategically bought up all the water companies around the world. And they had bought a very good water well, or at least a spring, and they were bottling quality water, which I drank, and I noticed that was very good. And I was in Australia many years ago, and I studied water, and I realised what good water is, because I also saw that Nestle was selling water. And when I drank that water, I knew instantly that it was just filtered water from the mains, or at least it tasted that quality.
Right, well, Nestle is trying to buy up all the water in the world as well, and have made, the CEOs made it very clear that we should not get water free.
Not a human right, he says.
No. So, but this is interesting, because in China, I would imagine that there is some sort of idea that everybody has a right to food and water.
Well, what I found is that the Chinese eat very, very well. So well, in fact, that I only saw one obese person in all the time that I was there. Only one fat person, and I thought they must have had a thyroid or a glandular challenge. But the food that they eat, and I went to markets and I looked at all sorts of food, very, very good quality on the appearance. I mean, I wasn't able to go in and check and see exactly where was the organic section or anything like that. But the Chinese are aware that they have to eat good food. But one thing that did upset me was seeing a lot of squid for sale. And I know that squid is picked up by all these squid fishing boats globally. And I have also been in touch with a person who used to work at AUT, Auckland University of Technology, who studied sperm whales, and he said that there's a lot of sperm whales that they're finding with no squid in their tummies at all, in their stomachs, because of the fact that there are too many fishing boats taking their squid from the water. So we have to really look seriously at this, because it's huge. The global fishing fleets are taking all the fish, and we got to get right back to localised aquaculture if we want to get savvy, and if people want to have protein from fish, then we've got to take the fish from land or ponds and not from our oceans.
Yes, it's a difficult one. I'll tell you, in Thailand, I have never seen so many fishing boats. They were just about cheek by jowl. It was incredible. So, I mean, I don't see how the fish have a chance.
They don't. I've had numerous interviews of people here in the studio, and they're using all the latest technology, sonar. They're tracking all these fish, and they're corralling them. And yes, we're going to have a crash by 2040 due to the fact that there's no real licensing, or not licensing. We've got to, as a humanity, start cutting back on taking the fish from the sea.
Yes. China as a country, it sounds like they are planning all the time for the future.
Oh, yes.
So I would think that they will actually eventually get to looking at fish stocks around the sea, because there is definitely this idea of we've got to look after the environment, the air, the water, and so I imagine the sea will come into that as well. But I hope not too late.
That's right. They're thinking about it, I know, because Premier Xi, I was actually there when they had their big, huge conference. It was a gigantic conference where he was able to consolidate power, but he was also laying out a vision. He wants China to be a beautiful country, and he knows that nature is part of this whole thing. And I want to get into Taoism and the ancient mystical thought of how China came into being thousands of years ago, but I want to be able to just cover also a few other things. I was amazed at all the bicycles that are lined up in the cities, and they've got the QR code, the quick response code, the matrix barcode, decal type thing, like a computer barcode that's stuck on all sorts of items these days, so that with a mobile telephone you can just go one click. That telephone then can follow through on that particular barcode, and we can find out all the information on that particular item. And they used Alibaba, which is the big Amazon of China, to act as the banker, so that all the people in China really, when they want to buy something, they just click, click, click like this, and it all automatically goes through Alibaba to their bank account, and the bank account is debited whatever that particular item that they want to buy. And so they're getting really, really organised. But get back to these bicycles. They even had little solar units in there as well to keep the lights, etc., going for the bike. But I have heard since that a lot of these bikes are ending up in dumps. People are, for the first hour it's free. And so in that first hour, if they dump it, they can walk away, no responsibility. After 1 hour, you have to get your phone and then click on the button to get your barcode sorted, and then they know who has actually taken responsibility for it. So they're going to have to tidy all this up.
They'll have to make it paying from the beginning, because I saw on the news, New Zealand news, a massive dump of bicycles in Beijing. It's absolutely huge.
Yes.
I couldn't believe it. And I thought, how could these people be throwing the bikes away? So, yes, they'll have to recycle them all, of course, and repair them and change the system and not give them an hour free, which is unfortunate, but that's, I suppose, human nature not really respecting the system.
You've got it. This is true. When you give somebody something free, regrettably, there are certain ones among us who just have got no respect for the goodness of what that gift is. And yeah, so with this new QR coding, it's going to be able to make the people more responsible for everything that they get. Because they're finding too that if they throw something away, like a cigarette packet on the side of the street, they can track back from that code too, like the RFID code, and see who bought it, and then find out who dropped it on the ground.
So really what you've got going on in China, you've got the kind of Western materialistic capitalist type of thought coming through, and that would be those people that would throw the bikes away. And then you've got the respectful people who still understand the old ways maybe, or who have been taught the old ways, that would care about the community and not just about the individual.
It's an interesting one. What shocked me, and that really shocked me, was wherever I went, as far as the eye could see, these 50-story apartment buildings. And I couldn't believe the amount of them. And I was on the bullet train, we're going through the country, you'd see clusters of them all over the country. And some of them I felt were a little bit too close to each other. But I managed to be able to go into one of these, and I was on the 12th floor, and I went into a home, and it was with Oniwa, my translator's family, and her sister and her husband and their little daughter, lovely little daughter, sweet one, Bella was her name. And I went in there, and they cooked me up a magnificent feast. And I was able to go in with my video, and the living room and the lounge were joined to the kitchen. And there was ample room for bedrooms, and the little daughter, she had her whole corner in the lounge. It was her little special posse, where she had a little fence around it, and she had her doll's house and all her toys, and it was delightful. And I thought to myself, if I had to live in an apartment, this apartment would definitely fulfill my needs. And so what it is that the government wants to make sure that people in China have got very good accommodation. And so
New Zealand could learn from that, couldn't they?
We could definitely learn from this. This is a very, very important issue, because what they've done is they've pulled up 600 million people out of what I would say quite depressed situations of huts and houses that some would say were possibly squalid, particularly in the rural sector. They've still got work to do there, but it's happening. And what really impacted me in this whole journey was that China has stolen a march on Uncle Sam. It has actually outflanked America by putting huge amounts of money into the infrastructure across the whole nation. And the reason why it's been able to do this is because it's got no wars going. America has got itself totally entangled in the octopus that it is in wars everywhere, particularly in the Mediterranean and the Arab world.
Well, Africa too, very quietly, yes.
Well, that's right. There's challenges for years in Somalia. So what America has done is it has squandered all its resources and put it into war, into the military-industrial complex, and if you do note, there's $21 trillion in the last few months that is unaccounted for, that has been lost within the military-industrial complex. $21 trillion. And it's come out of a big university in the United States. So we're going to find out more about this. So Michigan State University and Professor Mark Skidmore are exposing this fraud. America has lost its opportunity. I've been up to America in 2014. I was up there and I was astounded at how little infrastructure had been put in place. And Trump was actually he recognised it too, and he was going to put all this money into the infrastructure, and we just don't know what's going on there. But this is where it is now. China is quickly becoming a very modern country. For the last 20 years plus, it's essentially hoovered up all the cement and all the steel globally to build up their country.
Well, it's a big place to build up, isn't it?
Fourth largest country landmass-wise on Earth, yes.
And yeah, I was in the US in 2014 too, and it's 2011 actually, in New York. And, I mean, the pavements were broken all over the place. You had to watch where you were walking or you'd trip.
I agree with you. I remember when I went there in 2010, I went down to a specific place on Lincoln Boulevard just before you go up towards the airport. And way back in 1993, when I was in Los Angeles, I saw this particular part of the road and I thought, gosh, this is terrible. Well, in 2010, I went back to that same place and it was still there. And then I started photographing all the broken up footpaths. And the more I looked, I thought, this is terrible. And I thought, hold on, stop photographing all this sort of stuff. I don't want to photograph the demise of America. I want to see what are the good things coming through the cultural creators and see if we can actually rebuild our countries and rebuild our planet.
Well, it's running a bit slow in doing that, unfortunately, over there.
Yes.
But going back to China, how do you think they would have fared if they had not had a central government like that running it? Would they have been able to do it?
I don't think so. I mean, they've only known a central government, even going back to Chiang Kai-shek and all the way back to the dynasties. It always came from the top of the pyramid. But what it is at the moment is that I have faith. I came away with a feeling, Lisa, that China could also be a new light in the world, because I found a lot of kindness with the people. Particularly the old people. They'd look at me and they'd look at my bushy eyebrows and they couldn't understand who I was. And when my friend Oniwa, we went up to Shanghai in the main street of Shanghai, I mean, it was all dazzling lights, and clean and tidy. You had people always cleaning up after everybody. There was no cigarette butts on the ground, and China was a great nation of smokers, about 300 million. Well, that's starting to decline now. But when we walked through Shanghai, she would say, Tim, they're all staring at you. They're looking at you and they think, well, they know that you're not an American and they know that you're not a European. They just can't quite work you out. Yeah, and I said, well, it's not often that they see a hobbit from Matamata in New Zealand. So there was so much in the way of, goodness coming from the people. I was on a train once, and the Chinese wanted to share their food with me. They wanted to make sure that I was having a good trip, and we could only communicate through sign language in this case. I could anyway. But again, with Oniwa's family, they just took me out to restaurant after restaurant, and they wouldn't receive any money from me. They took me everywhere. They just wanted to be kind, and it's really interesting because when I came back to New Zealand, I met a Kiwi businessman who had worked and lived in China. And he said, Tim, you know what? Those Chinese people who took you out, they would have been really glad to have met you, because they've never really met a Westerner who likes to reciprocate and be kind, be thoughtful, be mindful. They see us Westerners going all the way back to the Opium Wars as really wanting to exploit China. And this is what really we have done. I mean, China has always been on the wrong end of the bargain when it has come to Britain, Europe and America. I mean, we've given China a hard time. And so the Chinese aren't too sure about us. So he said, when a lot of the Chinese people now, they're leaving China and going over to Canada and America and New Zealand and Australia, he said a lot of them have been able to get out of China because they've got a lot of money. They've been able to go into other countries, and he said some of these other countries that they go to, they're only seeing the entrepreneurial Chinese, the Chinese who are really going for the money, and they haven't got really a lot of time to spend with community in their new country, and sometimes you will see them as being focused only on money. Whereas in China, the ordinary people, they're not just necessarily focused on the monetary thing. Yes, they like the technology, they like the change that they're seeing. They are very, very proud of their country because in a matter of years, they are witnessing the upgrading of everything, from transportation to housing, and the health is getting better. Though I went to a Chinese health shop and I saw all the different leaves and roots of plants, and in Singapore you'll see even seahorses and
horrors.
Yeah, that's right. Tongues of this and that, and claws of bear, and this is the dark side of their health. But there's still a balance there between Western health and Eastern health. Acupuncture is still an important thing.
Well, they have, I know, acupuncture at hospitals, for example. So that's, they've got the best of the West and the East in a way.
Very true, yes. I had a very dear friend who went to an acupuncturist here in Mount Eden, and he was Chinese, and he used to fly back to Shanghai regularly, and he was involved with open heart surgery, and he was able to find the nodal points in that body so that they could have their operation without having to go through having injections and God knows what else, what we do to...
You mean anaesthetics?
Anaesthetics, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on in this country that we don't know, and I'm just fascinated with where it is going to go, bearing in mind that China and Russia are getting closer together when in actual fact America needs to find ways to put out their hand and say, come on, we all share the same breath, we are a planetary culture, we're a global family, we need to work it all out so that we can be a planet of peace.
Well, unfortunately, I don't see the US doing that anytime soon, and what New Zealand needs to know is we have to look at who our friends are. And that's really important, in my opinion.
You are listening to Lisa Eyre interview me, Tim Lynch, on my recent trip to China.
I mean, I know in China, for example, if you disagree with the regime or whatever, you're in big trouble, certainly. And if you go overseas to try and get away from it, they can still get you back one way and another. So there are some downsides, definitely. But overall, economically and everything else, I think that perhaps, yes, Russia and China should be our friends.
It's a very interesting thing because I thought about it, and there's always... I'm an activist, and if I see something that's out of alignment, or there's a human right being violated, or nature's been violated, I know that I'll get in and I'll stand up for nature. And I realise that most probably I would end up in the eyesight of the authorities, both in China and in Russia. So yes, I can see that I could get into a tight squeeze in these countries, and yet when I was in Russia only 3 years ago, they treated me royally. And I was with Russians for a whole month, and I never met an American or an Englishman or an Australian or anybody from the West. So we've got to have another look at life, and we need to go to these countries and spend time with the people, because the people are the common denominator. And I agree with you. We need to have a far more open understanding of foreign relations.
We could do that actually in New Zealand, because there are a lot of people from other countries in New Zealand, and yet they tend to stick together because they're not invited into New Zealanders' homes. There's no real, not enough anyway, community building between different nationalities here. And I notice it very much, actually, because I have quite a lot of friends from different nationalities, and also when I was working, we had, out of 29 staff, we had 15 different nationalities. So it gives you an idea then as to how people will view things differently. And I think we could do that in New Zealand, just build on that, even if you can't go overseas and see the other cultures. We can learn here.
I'm in agreement. I think being skilled in conflict resolution, understanding how we can, in many ways, find ways to communicate through all the difficulties, reconciling opposing points of views. I cannot understand why New Zealand hasn't had a huge involvement and communication with the Scandinavian countries. We needed to have been in Scandinavia for the last 30 to 40 years, just learning from them, because their social and their industrial ideas work towards getting the people on board working together. It's like having share ownership and things like that. So this may happen again. China may come through with some very interesting ways of doing life and innovative business principles.
They could do. I mean, now you're allowed more than one child, I think.
That's correct, too.
Because that was a really hard policy and put too much pressure on that one child. So the pressure on Chinese children to learn and to do well was really quite unreasonable, I believe.
Yes.
So hopefully that will relax now that there's more than one child.
I would think so. I'd like to think so too. Kiddies need a brother and a sister. They need somebody to play with, and it balances up everything. Otherwise they could. We know in other countries a single child could become quite precocious. But what I'm really trusting on, Lisa, is that once the Chinese people get full of material things, and especially consumerism, and realise that they only serve a certain purpose, that they will then start self-reflecting on who they are as a civilization and go back to how the early Taoists and the Buddhists live and look at all the different spiritual qualities, because there's a thing like Tai Chi and Qigong, Tai Chi, Qigong, Kung Fu. These have an understanding of Qi. Qi is a hidden energy that we in the West haven't been able to grasp at all, but acupuncturists can, because they know that Qi flows through our body, and by strategically placing certain needles in our body, they can unblock the energy at a meridian nodal point to allow us to have a flow in our whole physical configuration that will help us heal. And so then there's the I Ching. The I Ching for divining, very, very interesting method of being able to tune into certain forces. I mean, there's feng shui, is how you put a house together, how you put your rooms together, how the land is worked with, where you put trees and stones and walls and that sort of thing. They understand, they have this particular sense. And there are many other unique spiritual qualities to the Chinese way of life. And I know one of the things that shocked me when I was up in China 2003, the Simpsons had come to China, and Bart Simpson was on TV every night, and up to possibly 300 million young Chinese were watching Bart create mayhem and break all the taboos of life every night. That he was in many ways single-handedly, he was deconstructing and pulling the rug out from 2,500 years of Confucian thought.
Well, my problem with Bart Simpson and Homer Simpson, well, the Simpsons, is that it's a very poor role model for
Completely.
Boys.
You bet.
And that it's quite interesting. We've had quite a long time of the Simpsons here in New Zealand, and boys have been outperformed by girls at school. And it just makes me wonder how much influence the television has. I suspect it has huge influence on the children, seeing the boys are dumb and the girls are bright, because that's what the Simpsons were showing.
Very much
and
so.
It won't be very good if it does that in China either.
That's right. Well, I don't know. I didn't ask at the time. Were the Simpsons on China? I somehow think that they have been pushed aside, because when I was teaching in the language school here in Auckland, the Chinese came down. They flocked down in 2002, 2003. Auckland was a mass. The main street of Auckland at lunchtime was essentially 75% Asian and about 25% Auckland, solely because the language schools were in the city. But what was happening is that all the young students, up to 17, 18, 19-year-old, they would end up at the casino, they would end up at all the strip clubs. They found out that you go into the pubs and you get drunk and there's dope. There was all sorts of things. And what happened was that the Chinese parents realised that their children were learning things that were very, very frowned upon in China, and so they withdrew their children, and they wanted the teachers to then go back up to China and teach. Therefore, the children will be away from all the indulgences and distractions that are basically everywhere in our Western society.
Right. And so that's how you ended up going to China to teach then?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very sad. But I'm just going to take you back to when you were talking about Taoism and everything, and I'm wondering, why do you think the Falun Gong are persecuted? Because they believe in a lot of this sort of things that you were talking about, and yet they're persecuted.
There's supposed to be around about 70 million people who have become followers of Falun Gong. What they didn't do, they needed to just keep on growing, but their leader wanted to confront the establishment in China.
I see.
And that's where they made the wrong decision. They thought that they could use a bit of muscle and start to shift the dynamics of China, and they came up very strong against the political apparatus of China. Now, had they been more savvy, and the guy, I think he's still in New York or somewhere in the States, who essentially set it all up, if he said just let it run and just let it work its way in, so that all the neighbours in the end would come out of the apartment building and they'd be doing Tai Chi or Qigong out in the park. That would have then started to extend right across the whole country. But he used it as a power play far too early, because I think he wanted to get political.
Okay, so it was timing, really. It's like wanting the change that you're talking about, but trying to push it when society and the government wasn't ready. So did you see any people doing Tai Chi or whatever in the parks?
Not as much, solely because I was short of time.
Yes.
But when I was up there previously in 2003, I did Tai Chi with people in the park.
Lovely.
Yes. And I've also done a lot of Tai Chi in Taiwan and there as well when I used to go up to Taiwan. So outside China, these martial arts, or these soft martial arts, are still there to get the people to be flexible, to breathe deep and bring in the chi. Yes.
Right. So how do you think having that sort of lifestyle will work with the very high-tech China that's the other aspect of it?
Well, it's really interesting because at the moment, China has the fastest computers on Earth. They're doing mega billions of computations a second. They've bet America. They're well in advance. And it was really interesting because when I went up to China the first time, this is really, I think, one of the most interesting stories. In 1986, I went to Xi'an, and I happened to turn on a TV set. And I was watching the TV, and it showed an aeroplane, I think it was a Pan Am 747 flight, landing somewhere in China, and the cameras focused on some stairwell being pushed up to this aircraft. They didn't have air bridges in those days because China was not in the game plan at all. Anyway, 3 suits came out of this 747. Chinese men went up, shook hands, and they walked down the stairs. over the tarmac towards where the camera was. And it was just focused on these three American men with suits. And then they did a right-hand turn, and one had a briefcase. And they zoomed in on this briefcase. It had the initials IBM. America and IBM had come to China. And when I was there at that particular time in the railway stations, the destination systems were so archaic, they were so completely dilapidated. Anyway, I went back again in 1990, just after Tiananmen Square, and they had all modern signs in the airports. And I thought, oh, we've jumped up now. And then in about 2005, Lenovo, the Chinese corporation, computer corporation, went and bought IBM's desktop division and took that over. And then finally, they've now got the fastest supercomputers on Earth.
Oh, wow.
So what it was there, the State Department in America would have given IBM the authority to take this technology to China, but the State Department were not savvy, because as soon as this information came, the Chinese would have had at least 10,000 technicians and engineers working 24/7 on it and understanding everything they could about computers. Now, I want to jump across. In New Mexico, there is the Sandos Laboratory, and there's also the Los Alamos Laboratories, 2 military laboratories, each with 9,000 scientists in each, working on defence, armaments, etc., or on GE. So what it is, these big military laboratories are in America, same in China. And so the People's Liberation Army would have said, right, let's put all our people into it. They could have had 100,000 different Chinese technicians, for all I know, looking at all the ways on how to deal with computers. Now, China at the moment is really, really the leader. And so it all stemmed possibly from that IBM trip way back in 1986.
Oh, and I have a Lenovo computer, so
yes,
and it's very good.
Yes, well, you see, and we don't know if there's a backdoor entry to all these computers.
Yes.
We still don't know, and this freaked a lot of Americans out now too, because they're buying Lenovos.
Right.
And so the Chinese could be actually coming through the back door.
Oh, well.
There's a lot going on, and America has accused China of hacking into so many things, particularly in the military establishment. And we don't know yet the full story. There's a whole new game going, and all we have to do is to make it really clear we've got to work together. And I want to just say one small thing. When I was teaching here in New Zealand, some young Chinese kids came into the classroom and they said, we're ready for America. And I said, what do you mean? Oh, yeah, no, China's big enough now. We can take on America. And I said, are you sure? Yep. And so I went up to the blackboard and I drew the outline of a nuclear submarine. Just an outline, and I said, in that submarine there is 20 ballistic missile bays or launch areas. So there's 20 missiles in that one submarine, and they have 8 multiple re-entry nuclear warheads. And I says, okay, 8 20s, what does that come to? They worked that out. 160 warheads, and I says, that's just one American nuclear submarine. And they've got something like about 16 of these, as well as all the bombers and all the Minutemen sitting in silos up in Montana and God knows what else. I says, you're learning English. I want you to learn English, to go up to an American, put your hand out, shake hands and say, hello, brother. Let's see how we can all work together to resolve all the challenges that we have as a humanity if we want to have world peace and we want to have children, have a future, and that includes you.
Well, that's a very good idea. Unfortunately, the last couple of days, the US has flown into Chinese airspace around the islands in the South China Sea, and China is not happy. So, and America's sort of saying, poo-poo, it's not important. But, yes, we're going to still have to watch American and Chinese relations very, very closely, because the US, as it always does, is pushing hard.
Yes, well, yes, this is a difficulty. The American and military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower talked about and which possibly Kennedy wanted to curtail, or at least dampen down, is still in the ascendant at the moment. And as I said, with this $21 trillion, we just don't know what's going on. all we do know is that citizen diplomacy is the answer. Lisa, we have to, as New Zealanders, instead of going to all Paris and to London, we need to actually go to Moscow and to Beijing and to Shanghai and start communicating with all sorts of people to say, right, we all share the same breath, we all love our children, we want a future for everybody that they can really enjoy and go into the light of their own true selves as a global family.
We absolutely have to do this or we're not going to survive. We're not going to survive the risk of nuclear war. We're not going to survive climate change if we don't work together. So the whole idea of people of the world working together is essential for our survival.
So true. You see, that they're looking at 20% of reforestation throughout China.
Yes.
This is a real big one, and they're looking at renewable energy, and they say that very shortly up to 20% of China's energy is going to come from renewables. When I was at the school in 2003 in a place called Yuyao, which is between Ningbo and Hangzhou, for want of a better place to clarify, we had solar hot water systems on all the school buildings. This is in 2003.
Great.
So, and I saw windmills, big, gigantic windmills when I was there as well, ticking over. So what it needs is we need to be really creative and wanting to find ways to reach out and meet all these different peoples of the world and say, we've got to take care of today and tomorrow for our children and our grandchildren.
And in New Zealand, I think particularly, a lot of New Zealanders are pretty anti-Chinese. So I hope that you've listened to the interview with interest, because it's not just about, those Chinese coming in and buying our land, or, we're selling our water over to China. It's not just about this. There's a much bigger picture, and it's important that we all get on together.
I'm in full agreement.
Well, Tim, we're just about at the end of the interview. We've got a little bit more time.
Oh, good.
What would you really like to say about China, your real, most important impressions?
That in my travels, I've found that 85 to 90% of the world's population are essentially good people. Good people. They just want to get on with family, have a good job, have a holiday, have a house and a car, and communicate with family members, relations, etc., and see the world. And so look for the good in everybody. Be prepared to put your hand out and be open to their coming back to you and sharing. That's the first thing. I think also learning a language is important. My Chinese students used to laugh and they said, Tim, it's going to be Chinglish soon. It's Chinese and English combined. But it's imperative for us to be able to know particularly greetings and thank yous and a few other key words prior to us going to a country, so that we can set up a good resonance between us and call on the goodness of people. But also, I think from New Zealand's standpoint, we need to have a far more broader approach to life. We need to have lots of New Zealanders who are adept at conflict resolution, going out and living with some of these families, hanging out with them. I don't know what sort of cross-cultural ties we have, particularly with education, and what sort of scholarships we have. I mean, we used to have American field scholarships, and I think they still go. We need to have these with China, with Russia, with, in many cases, countries that are in need of just knowing how the other part of the world live. Because I've seen videos of people who have come to live with families in New Zealand and go to school. This is the glue that holds our whole global community together, is when we are going and we're living with a family somewhere else and we just let the love flow. We really get to an understanding that they're different, but they're good. And if we can find the will to do this, the will is required to make that effort, go out of our comfort zone and come to an understanding that we all share the same breath. We are brothers and sisters, and we are a global family.
Well, I think you've really said it there, Tim. So thank you so much for coming into the studio and talking to me instead of you interviewing somebody else. It's been really lovely, and I'll look forward to listening to this again as I edit.
Well, I thank you, Lisa, because I don't get the chance to talk. This is the first time really I'm allowed to get into the flow of things. Usually I just ask a question because all I'm doing in many ways is giving a platform for somebody to let their light out, to share what they wish to offer to the world. And so I can find myself with a very limited expression. But you've given me a little bit more rope, so this is wonderful, and I want to thank you very much for asking me and keeping me on track, and see if we can have greenplanetfm.com offer up a far greater opportunity for people to come together so that we can make our world the place we want to be.
Thank you very much, Tim. This interview was sponsored by the Awareness Party.
Postscript. In understanding China and its 5,000 years of history, back through the mists of time, we also have to take into account that they also have a mystical dragon that is seemingly a benevolent being that they even incorporated into their 12-yearly astrological moon calendar. That, to the ordinary person who lives in the Western Hemisphere, is outside the norm. So there definitely is an enigma as to who and what do the Chinese people offer to the world and where it is going. So what is China's destiny? To the Chinese in the highest echelons of government, many of them think it's their time to take a leadership role and even step right out in front as a planetary leader. What is now being realized is that President Xi Jinping, who has just been voted in to take extraordinary power to become the president for life, we ask, what does this portend? Especially when we realize the stupendous challenges and difficulties he endured as a young boy all the way through into his 30s. Yes, a myriad of questions confront such a gigantic country, many among them being their agreement to the United Nations Agenda 21 and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So today, with the predominance of CCTV and biometric identification advancing exponentially, coupled to fifth-generation telephone networks, the peoples of the cities of China will need to still have rest and recreation in the rural sector and the countryside and parks, and also breathe in the most freshest and purest of air, drink the most cleanest and vital of water, and naturally eat organic food, bypassing factory and industrial food. So there are huge challenges to surmount, especially equal pay and opportunity for women, and that the Chinese people become self-realized and self-disciplined as they go about their daily life. For with this dynamic country, many possibilities are very ripe for their civilization to become mindful, yet creative, culturally, yet from a regenerative perspective, takes us closer to unity consciousness on a planetary scale whilst retaining their own country's sovereignty. Yes, take a trip to China and see and experience for yourself. You will be amazed.
You've just been listening to Green Planet on Planet FM. Join us at the same time next week, 8 a.m. Thursdays, or anytime online at greenplanetfm.com.
I invite you to be able to come to greenplanetfm.com, where we have over 400 interviews in our database, which you can readily download and listen to be able to inspire yourself to become the change you want to see in the world and become involved in caring for your children and grandchildren's future. We are also on Facebook, on Green Planet FM and ourplanet.org. Please come and love us. This is Tim Lynch.
And or Lisa Eyre.
And Liz Gunn.
In the spirit of Aroha, wishing you a wonderful week. We look forward to being with you next week. I say, kia kaha and haere ra.